everyone is quiet.
Nothing specific. I'm here to listen and see what way we can cooperate. Yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. We will be getting questions from the audience as we go on, and we will pass those questions on to the moderator, who will ask as appropriate. It is 4 p.m. Nigerian time. Distinguished panelists, Honorable Minister, and our audience, welcome to this series, this session of webinar in the series which Business Day started 2 weeks ago. We have had a number of sessions in the past, one focusing on the economy and citizenship. We had one focusing on how to deal with redundancies and how to manage workforce from remote location. We've also had one on health. Our experience is that in the past, we have seen, as part of the audience, ministers serving and past, diplomats from various embassies, and we've seen people calling as well, or dialing or logging from around the country, even from as far away as Singapore. So this afternoon, we are looking forward to another interesting conversation. And I'm very delighted to welcome this afternoon Honorable Minister of State for Education, Honorable Chukwuemeka Nwajuba. Welcome, sir. I also welcome the chairperson of the Corona Schools Trust, Ms. Yohin Adesina, the CEO of Edfin Microfinance Bank, Ms. Bumi Lawson, the CEO of Tech for Nigeria, Ms. Folawe Omikule, and of course, two gentlemen, Dr. Tunji Adegbason, CEO of Gidi, and Sim Shagaya, CEO of ULesson. I think I've done my bit, and I will, at this point, gladly yield to Professor Yinka David West, who teaches at the Pan-Atlantic University and will be the moderator for this evening. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Frank, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this digital dialogue series from Business Day and MTN. It's an honor to be here with such an esteemed panel, having a conversation about something that's dear to each and every one of our hearts, which is education. At this point in time, I'm just going to set some background in terms of where we are in Nigeria in education. And as we know, the COVID-19 situation has sort of transformed and accelerated the way we think about digital when it comes to education. And so when we think about it now, we have about 1.3 billion learners around the world that are unable to attend school. And this also happens in Nigeria, where we have certain sociocultural norms about going to school. We have certain access restrictions about going to school, and we have also the issues regarding affordability. But according to an infographic we got from Teach for Nigeria, in Nigeria, we have about 10.5 million children who are out of school, and a third of them who are of school age are not even enrolled in any school at all. Only 29% of students graduate from secondary school, if at all. And then we also have about an average of 49 pupils per primary school teacher. So we have ratios that are also out of this world. And then when we look at the spending and the financing for education, only 6%, between 6 and 8% of our national budget is really spent towards education, while the recommendation by UNESCO is about 26%. So when we think about this in terms of education, we see that gradually within the workforce, we have a challenge where we have an issue with quality and quantity of education, and there are gaps across various dimensions like gender, regional, income levels, and socioeconomic status, overcrowding in public schools and some classrooms, and then also funding. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. We're talking about we're rethinking education today and rethinking education in Nigeria, looking at the way forward post-COVID. So Honorable Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. We know that you're having different conversations regarding this. But can you just start us off with a conversation of enlightening us on what are the thrusts of Nigeria's education policy as we have it today?
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, everybody. I will start by explaining that we at the Federal Ministry of Education are set up to coordinate education efforts around the country. Our job primarily is to ensure that formal and organized education does take place in a systemic and organized year has been faced with a couple of challenges, the most notable of which is the out of school number of children. That number is a little bit embarrassing because it appears to be the largest in the world. It has been occasioned by many of the things that you talked about, cultural practices and issues of access, issues of availability of those to run it. However, Nigeria is a bit more complex than many people will note. Nigeria runs a concurrent list of matters on this constitution, and in a federation, everything about primary to secondary school education is on the concurrent list. Government, almost in all circumstances, has to bow to the wishes of the subnationals because they are the delivery point. That has ensured that the outcomes vary in the 36 states, and it is almost impossible to make them uniform because state governors get changed every once in a while, 8 years, 4 years, as the case may be. And in spite of anybody's best intentions, they tend to pander to things that will win elections because people in Nigeria would prefer to see roads, see buildings, see things. Nigerians are not content persons when it comes to election matters. So the same people who are really not in a position to take these good decisions are the ones asked to vote for people in power, to power. And those people in power understand that if they spend all their money upgrading teachers, if they spend all their money providing everything that you need in school and not do and commission borehole water, do not spend money on one nice building or one something that you can see, they will lose the election and they will be thrown out anyway. And then somebody else who comes will start thinking in the same way. So really, that politician or the person who is running government at any time is faced with this enormous challenge of trying to balance how he runs a state. And because of that, state governors are all constrained to think this way, irrespective of political party. And over the years, this has built up, and a lot of these children are now out of school. As that translates also into the quality, because apart from access, the next rung of the education ladder will then be quality and what is being taught. That is affected by the quality of teachers, quality of infrastructure, and quality of learning aids that are available at every point. That also is constrained, not just by the fact that funding is limited and that Nigeria is really a very poor country, but by the fact that people also think differently at those levels. Teachers in Nigeria are not average, very respected profession the way it used to be. And they are constrained to almost taking, most people would rather not be teachers. Those who are in it for the passion are very limited. And as soon as they can find other things that they would like rather do, they join the bankers, they join the oil companies, they join anything else just to make their lives better. And with the digital economy, everybody is willing to jump ship as soon as he's offered a little bit more salary. So we're losing teachers, especially experienced ones. So that goes up to the next level, which is what our outcomes. Our outcomes then define one of the standards that everybody has been talking about, was the quality of the graduates that come out of our schools. Because if somebody's been already ill prepared, does not matter what you then do at the point where he is now with you at your universities or tertiary level, they become a little bit problematic to lecture or to conduct service with. So this entire gamut from the beginning to exit is governed by a structural regime that we're trying to address. In my previous incarnation as a member of the National Assembly in 1997 to then 1999 and then 2004, we enacted what is called, now popularly called the UBEC Act, which is the Universal Basic Education Commission Act. 22, 23 years ago, I was quite younger, so we were very determined that this was something that would be done with a lot of muscle. And we insisted that if anybody does not go to school, we'll arrest him, we will jail his parents, we will do all of that. And that was what we wrote into that law. 20 years down the line, as Minister of Education, I found out that our best intentions then couldn't have possibly been achieved because nobody was going to arrest any parent and put them in prison. Well, that is where we are, and that has occasioned the imbalance, because as soon as the monies that we created at UBEC reaches the state suburbs, it becomes political in how it is utilized, and there's nothing the federal government can do about it. The state governors govern that, they appoint who is the suburb chairman, and they determine what they must do with the money. The outcomes we now have are what we're dealing with. So the COVID experience has now shone its light on all that we have been doing. The gaps that were created, this essentially, we widen it. The gap, the underserved are the worst hit, because even with a limited capacity in Nigeria, parents of rich children of rich parents and those who can afford private education, whether at primary or tertiary or middle school or at tertiary level, are still accessing education. They can still get it. But a vast majority at the fringes of society in remote areas, Gamboru, Goma, in the creeks, people don't have access to any of these devices or any of the facilities that possibly could make that. What we have done is address the curriculum issue first. We have now gotten the NERDC, is a council that's set up for curriculum development. It has marshaled out all the curriculum content for the 12 classes, and they've digitalized all of this and put them on our website. But we've gone back to ask state governors to then please help us. Since we know that all children can get online, and some of them, even the offline facilities we've offered, they have devices for them. We've also pleaded with them, and 31 states have now gotten up from us at Monday, who have now published timetables in their local TV and radio stations, so that those who can will be able to allow. And at the end of this partnership is our relationship with parents. And since children on their own, whilst at home, may not necessarily be amenable to sitting down and getting instructions, parents also owe us a duty to just bring them to the radio, whatever, for 1 hour or for 2 hours or whatever the timetable in those areas are. But even with this, this is as good as an effort only if people can take up what the teaching aids are. We still have a huge issue with the Amajiri children being moved up and down. States are, so many of the states in the north are dislodging some Amajiri children and moving them to their states of origin. Many of the, this is farming season, and it's about to get even worse at the front, because in order to feed the urban rich men and people, they need to have people at the farms, because we're not still hugely agriculturally mechanized. So all of these people are still, and then we have the problem of the young girls who we have been trying with all the, even with this, because they become even married off, some get married off at underage age, and we have all kinds of complex cultural problems. But what we're doing at the Ministry of Education is taking into almost 12 of 19 states, trying to challenge. Most of them were my colleagues. So many of them were my colleagues when I ran for governor. So we've been almost on a boxing match together. We'll try to solve as much problem as propositions from many well-meaning Nigerians, people who have studied a lot. I've just seen what Shagaya has proposed, the dongle that he has. We've received people who are also offering from Konga, Juma. Everybody's talking to us with different devices, different problem with the Ministry of Education at the federal level, like I said, is that it probably wouldn't be able to spend a lot of money. We coordinate the efforts of the international organizations and try to direct them as to what is most suitable and can be married. If they have resources for it, they can then use that to obviate it. If they do not, then we will keep looking for other ways to do that. We've received a lot of offers for people who are doing offline devices, who want to go to different villages and do that. But with 68,000 primary schools in Nigeria, I would need people to get in touch with us and let us map out areas that have not been served, and those have. We are willing and we are available to seek help, or we're seeking help from every quarter, and we're available to dialogue with anybody. And that's why I'm really grateful to BusinessDay and MTN and all the other providers, Airtel, those who have made their platforms free, My Mobile, Glow Mobile, everybody's made learning portals free, and everybody is working hard at this. On behalf of Nigerian children, and I'm inclusive, I really want to thank you all and say I'm welcome. I'm here to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And you sort of expanded the ecosystem for us and also explained how your friends have become adversaries to a certain degree. But I think you highlighted certain things which are very important, which is also going back to our citizenry and how we need to sort of think about the social contract that we have regarding us and our election and our politicians and the election process in general. And I think you've also highlighted a lot of the challenges that we see in terms of changing our mindset regarding education vis-a-vis physical infrastructure. And as you rightly said, this COVID-19 pandemic issue has sort of really exposed the underbelly of Nigeria in a way where, because whether we like it or not, since the turn of the century, we've lived in a world which we call the digital economy, but yet we haven't really seen that transform our society in general. So knowledge is key and knowledge is power. But I'm now going to ask, continue the conversation, and really let me ask for Lawe. So the Honorable Minister has dimensioned the social change, the changes and the challenges that we see in the industry. What else do you want to add to that?
So I thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with the Honorable Minister. And, as you were sharing all of these challenges, from access to quality of teachers to the outcome issues, I begin to remind myself why we do the work that we do at Teach for Nigeria. Like, the approach and the fundamentals that drives the approach that we leverage and the approach we use is all hinged on leadership. And so when you think of the challenges and just the complexity of it and how systemic it is, it requires multiple stakeholders working alongside one another to fix the issues. And I'm going to bring this home and just share some context. So we run an organization that is called Teach for Nigeria, where we recruit young graduates and young professionals, outstanding individuals, to teach for 2 years in underserved communities. Now, the idea is to develop leadership for the education ecosystem, and leadership that has experience and that understands what the fundamental issues are. Now, when COVID-19 happened, just to your point, like this literally just amplified the already existing inequality and inequity that exists in the system, where we have teachers who are saying to us, for example, that I'm in a community where my children don't even have access to water. Like the time that they're to be listening to the TV or radio, they're going to fetch water for their parents. The time that, because everybody is home now, it's the girls who are cooking. They're not even able to teach or to learn. I can't even reach them. You know, we're having conversations where the teacher says, the community in which I'm teaching in a riverine area, there's no broadband, there's no connectivity, there's no power in this community. You know, the children don't even have access to learning aids and learning materials, no textbooks and no notebooks. Like, even if they could access radio, like, how are they going to learn? And so there are all of these issues. And, you know, for me, it's, we call it the jigsaw puzzle. And it's just understanding that, to your point, like the access issue, the outcome issue, the teacher quality, the leadership, the politics, the governance, the funding, like there are all these different pieces that requires people with the commitment, people with the mindset, people who are transformative leaders who can lead in all these diverse sectors. And when I think about the work that we do, and I think about, you know, the urgency for us to start finding leaders across different sectors. Earlier in the week, we're having a conversation around like the role of telcos. We're having the conversation around the role of media. So for example, now, you know, our kids are out of school, nobody's learning. How do we have leadership in the telco who is thinking, okay, maybe this is the time for us to work in partnership with the ministries of education across the different states or at the federal level to provide access? You know, who is convening these conversations and who is sort of channeling the energy of the different stakeholders, you know, to this table? I really think that COVID-19, you know, has shown to us there's a silver lining here. I think there's an opportunity for us to really transform and turn things around. We're already in an epidemic. And I think that if we don't seize the opportunity to sort of rethink and adjust, you know, to just like this thing that has come to us now that we're dealing with, we might be closing to disaster. And so it's really more around how do we identify leaders across different sectors who can champion leadership and who can, you know, transform the different sectors and work collectively to ensure that, you know, we see the change and transformation that we hope to see.
Okay, so thank you, Falawe, for that. And I think that you're sort of expanding on the fact that we need to close these inequality and inequity gaps in general. And I think the gender issue is something that we also need to be very mindful and cognizant of. But before we unpack in terms of opportunities and what we need to do, let me ask you, Yonyi, at the Corona School Trust Council, how are you managing all these things, and how are you sort of able to keep your standards going, keep education going, curriculum, teachers, learners, and how do you manage all these moving pieces?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you for having me here, and I must admire the candor that the Honorable Commissioner has shared, the challenges that we have in the educational sector. They are huge, and listening to him, it was like, oh dear, where are we and how are we going to surmount all of these? Coming back to Corona, Corona is a not-for-profit education provider. It was founded in 1955, and what underpins what we do in Corona and what drives us and gets us to challenge what we do every day is our mission, which is to provide world-class education, to inculcate high moral and ethical values in our students as we prepare them for a life of service, lifelong learning, service and fulfillment, and of course, to develop world-class schools. And in the past 65 years, all of what we have been doing have been driven by strategies and all of that to validate these statements. And we do that periodically, assess what we do through several sessions, strategy sessions. Now, one of what we do again is to try to give back to the society. And all of our schools have adopted a private school, and we try to support all of the private schools by providing infrastructure, improving the infrastructure, contributing to providing books and learning materials, providing furniture, providing computers, providing generative sets, going as far as teacher training and development, and even scholarships. I recall a particular instance, and we were working with a school, and I just say this to speak to what the commissioner, honorable commissioner, said about the issue of education being politicized. We were in a school and we were trying to support the school, and we discovered their roof had been blown off, and all the children from primaries 1 to 6 were learning just within one room. And we raised funds and we wanted to go and, give them a completely new block. And the head of the school said he needed to get approval from the local government education authority. And by the time we went back to him, he said we needed to prove that we needed to show a party card to show that we were not from an opposition party. And this completely floored us, because when that becomes a consideration for getting help or for providing support for a school, then it speaks to the fact that education definitely must be apolitical. It cannot be left to the whims and caprices of politicians to determine what goes on in the educational sector. And I would like to, reiterate the values of the SDG 4, and that talks about inclusion, that talks about equity, that talks about quality, and all of this to promote lifelong learning. And I looked at it from 3 areas that I think we need to do a lot more on, and the government also needs to provide more in those areas. One of that is in our early years. I mean, we've looked at the statistics, we know how many children are out of school, and we've talked about access, we have talked about devices, but then there's this group as well that have been completely disenfranchised. Early years program is almost non-existent in all of our schools. And when we look at that, I mean, looking at how it translates to the primary education, secondary and tertiary, there's a big gap there. And this speaks to human capacity. And I'm glad the commissioner also talked about, the quality of teachers. It's clear with the COVID-19 going on that we need to do a lot more to improve our digital capacity as well. I mean, from an environment where we pride ourselves that we are doing well in, online, being able to provide online schooling and online services, we know that there's still a lot more that needs to be done. Now, we also need to look at the area where government needs to improve the dialogue and the narration with public-private sector. There's a lot being done. People are working in silos, as it were, but we need to synchronize all of these. We need to bring it together. We're looking at 68,000 primary schools. We are looking at children, 10.5 million children who don't have access to education. So there's a lot to be done. I think what we need to do is to strip ourselves, first of all, of what's in it for me, and look at the larger picture, look at the need, look at the gaps. And COVID-19 has thrown that up now. The gaps are there. They are staring us in the face. Now, whatever it is we are doing in our silos, we need to realize that it's just a drop in the ocean. And it doesn't meet, any percentage at all of the needs and the gaps out there. So Corona is a private school, yes. We pride ourselves in the quality of education that we give, but I like the saying that says that a chain is as strong as the weakest link. And so there's need to go to those areas where their education is not being served and meets the needs of the underserved children.
Thank you very much, Yonyi, for that. And I think you're looking more, again, let's work together, collaborate in an ecosystem environment. Before we continue, ladies and gentlemen, we have a poll that you can see pop up on your screen. So I would appreciate if you could just sort of answer the question so we know where you're from and what exactly your concerns are regarding COVID. So I will continue the conversation while you're filling out that poll. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention now. So Bumi, I'm going to come to you. Now you're a unique personality in this ecosystem because it's either you're a provider or you're an institution in that sense. But let me ask you, so you set up a microfinance bank focusing on the education sector. Can you just share with us why you did that and what gaps or challenges you were trying to address in the process? Bumi, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon all. And it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for the question. Edfin Microfinance Bank was set up basically to provide access to finance for the education ecosystem. For us, one of the things that we realized was that the funding, either from government, was inadequate or to provide the level of education that we wanted. One, in the area of access, the second in the quality of education that is available. And of course, there's the divide between the rich and those from low-income households who cannot afford to pay for the quality of education that they wanted. So we felt at Edfin that we can mobilize private sector capital to provide access to finance, that more it would help to ease the inequality that's currently obtained when you talk about access to education. So we focus typically on low-cost schools, helping them to improve the quality of education that they provide. We also give loans to teachers so that they have better access to better standards of living, and so therefore will have better pleasure in remaining a teacher. One of the things we see during COVID now is that schools are not earning income. Schools are closed for longer than any other business area, and therefore teachers would suffer because they may not be able to earn income during this period. So what they too need funding. Schools are not able to provide that funding. And of course, when you look at low-cost primary schools, the flow of cash is typically once in a term. So how do they stretch that to ensure that it actually covers the whole term and therefore can continue to invest in the critical infrastructure and content and working capital that they need to run a school? So that's what we've done, especially now during COVID. Those low-cost affordable schools, so that they're not left behind. How do they too go start providing remote learning? And I use remote as opposed to digital because I just sort of feel that the learning can't be only through the internet or, but they would need to invest money. So now most of those schools are closed. They are not able to collect school fees, but they have to invest in equipment, and teachers continue to teach and so on and so forth. How do they get the funding? So that's where Edfin comes in to be able to provide that funding. And it's basically to actually mobilize private capital to support government in the investment in schools and private schools, because we recognize that government alone can't do all the investment that is required. And it's not only in Nigeria, everywhere in the world, including high income countries, have private education. So it's not about that education, private education is elitist. Education for us, we feel that everyone should have a right to it, whether privately provided or by government. And so we are here to actually ensure that schools have access to those funds that they need.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bumi, for that introduction. And I think I'm now going to go to, again, a different type of education provider, which is not a school. So let me start with you, Sim. You started off ULesson. So what gap were you trying to address when you started off ULesson? And then you might also want to introduce the product and sort of help us understand your model and your delivery approach. You're muted, Sim. Can you unmute yourself, please, Sim?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Great, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be here with all of these panelists. It truly is a privilege. So, before I sort of talk about ULesson, if you don't mind, Prof, I'd like to just add a little bit to this discussion as to how COVID might impact education in the country. And I do think that ULesson and models like it have a role to play in these times. So schools are not going to go anywhere, but I think we're entering a period of great transformation. And the tools that myself and Tunji are applying towards education, I think they're going to become more widespread. So if you think about it, we have to face a truth here, which is that the world is not going to be the same after this. This thing that we're going through is unprecedented. It hasn't happened in 100 years. And I think any belief or expectation that we'll return to the world of before, frankly, I think it's sort of having our head in the clouds. Now, I think that the form and nature and structure of education is going to fundamentally change. Like I said, I don't think schools are going to go anywhere. I think they're going to evolve. And you're already seeing that evolution happening. So the question is, what will schools look like in a year's time, in 5 years' time? Now, I don't think it's possible for any of us to say precisely, but I think we can get a general sense by looking into the past and asking what happened during a similar time that the world went through a similar event. So it's not so much COVID itself, it's the fact that COVID is going to leave in its wake massive economic disruption. Both public and private players in the education sector are going to find themselves under incredible financial pressure. And the last time something like this happened, I think we can turn to the United States, the 30s, if you like, the Great Depression of the 30s, give you a sense of how impactful these events can be on education, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. So before the 30s, you had basically classrooms in the United States housing children of all ages. It was in a quest for efficiency that we saw sort of the class structure that has emerged now. So that was a major change that we saw. The Great Depression was strange, and some people have argued we may enter a depression during this period also. It was strange in the sense that schools could not afford teachers anymore. I mean, Bumi just mentioned how teachers are suffering. Schools could not afford teachers anymore. But at the same time, so schools were laying off teachers, but at the same time, strangely, parents were putting more kids in school, especially secondary school students. And that's because kids back then in America were not in school, they were working. But because there was no employment, school and parents were obliged to keep children in schools. So you had this thing going on where there were fewer teachers, but more students. And so the teacher-student ratio went out of whack. So during that time is when you saw bigger classrooms. Now, these schools were under pressure. So what did they do? They made a quest for efficiency. So classrooms got bigger. You saw things like social promotion emerge, where no matter how well a child did, they had to be promoted to the next class. These are the kind of changes that this kind of event we're going through can create. So we have to ask ourselves now, what does efficiency mean in the context of today? And if you ask yourself that, then we can start to see the kind of world that is going to emerge. I think we're going to see that same student-teacher ratio explode even more using digital technologies. I think you're going to see trends that we've seen in terms of learning, this learn at your own pace type of thing, and this notion of continuing education, I think is going to become even more acute. Basically, I think events like this have a tendency to accelerate trends that were already happening. Now, for us at ULesson, what we've done is we've taken the best teachers we could find and we've put them in a studio, very much like you produce a movie. And we've had them be supported by rich animation and very talented scriptwriters, again, like you're producing a movie, except now the script is about Newton's third law of motion. It's about eukaryotic cells. It's about, distillation. And these teachers are supported by animation. And so we take all of this content and we deliver it via an app. So, right now, a secondary school student using ULesson can have access to the entire curriculum of maths, physics, chemistry, and biology for 5,000 Naira for a period of 5 months, which is effectively, if you amortize it, 1,000 Naira a month. Now, the concern may be, how do you do this in the context of bad internet connectivity? We basically loaded up the entire secondary school curriculum on a device of this size that you plug into your phone. So these are the tools that I think that we're going to start seeing emerge more and more. Like I said, I don't think schools will go away. There will always be a place for great schools like the Corona schools. They will always be there. Harvard is not going to go anywhere. Princeton and Oxford are not going to go anywhere. But you're going to see these schools use these digital technologies more and more as they face the financial pressures that we are all facing. And I think you're going to start seeing these pure play digital players like ULesson trying to create digital outcomes for students. I mean, we are a supplemental service, if you like. But I think you're going to even see the core service providers do this. And government also, I think government, look, whether we like it or not, the federal and state governments are going to be under tremendous pressure. And so they have to rethink things completely. This is not the time to do things as as they were. I mean, I'm not trying to cry wolf here. The truth is the government is under tremendous fiscal pressure. So they are going to have to rethink delivery of education. I think that's going to mean different things. The use of digital technologies, I think private sector players will play an increasingly important role. And I think continuing education is going to be a big part of that also.
Thank you, Sim, for that. And I think that you sort of set the stage where we're not looking at education as a place or a school in that sense. We're looking at education as access to content, which you're liberalizing in that way. So could you tell us, how are you doing this at Gidimo?
Thank you very much. So I'll try to be concise, but education is my passion, and you know, we've been doing this at Gidimo for approaching 8 years now. We were driven originally by a fear. You know, I was an academic. I'd been an academic for over a decade, and I was running a research center, and we were generating data. And you start looking at the data that tells you that at the time there was space for only about 300,000 children in the first year. We've grown that capacity to somewhere in the range of 500,000. But we have 1.7 million children sitting for the school leaving exam every year. So even if they were all to pass, there was no space for them in the university to start with. But then even with that, we couldn't fill the available seats because we didn't even have, and we still don't have, enough passing to fill those seats. And while in Nigeria, I will always fight and say we're too examination focused and not learning focused, still, that certification we call WAEC is trying to say that you just wasted 6 years of this child's life. If after 6 years, this child is unable to demonstrate proficiency in the body of knowledge, something has gone wrong. So we had two problems. One problem was mastery, proficiency, and scale, you know, because you would see that it was almost impossible. And considering the fact that we have 18 million, half of the country below the age of 18. So that's another 100 million behind, another 50 to 60 million on the way. You have 10 million in secondary school and 20 million in primary school. So where are those ones going to fit? And the ones below the primary school are like 30 to 40 million. So who is going to create this scale? So I took a look back to the 12th and 13th centuries when we started scaling education. And if you could go all the way back to Socrates and Aristotle, who are, you know, but if you look at University of Paris, Oxford, the 14th century, 13th century, you see that they had two stages to their learning. There was the expositionary phase where you have teacher who is doing exposition, professor explaining. Then you had the personal mastery phase where you would go to your college and your tutor and you would have this personal explanation. And so you have these four players in education: the institution, the teacher, the learner, the sociocultural context. And over time, we scaled the institutions to some degree. We scaled the teachers to some degree, but we did not scale personal mastery. And my point here is that even if only 400,000 to 500,000 can fit in university, the other 1.2 million have to earn a living. So that thing we gave them in those years of education in that high school is supposed to be useful for something. But if they have not learned anything useful, they're not going to be useful to themselves. They're not going to be able to eat. They will therefore become a nuisance to society. And I have also graphs and charts I can show you where you can link proficiency in senior high school in Nigeria to the places in the country where you have most social unrest, because that's what 17 to 19-year-olds who don't know what to do. So the question was, can you do personal mastery at scale? So what Gidimo does is it takes two pieces of this puzzle. And by the way, the second problem for teens, so one is mastery. The second problem for educating teenagers, as any teacher will tell you, is engagement. So there's a problem in education called learner readiness. So learner readiness is when the student is there with you, facing you, thinking with you, as opposed to being in an Arsenal match. So what we try to do with Gidimo is to drive high fidelity, high engagement learning, whereby you can have millions of people achieving mastery of their curriculum. So what we did is we took the curriculum, all the subjects of senior high school. I focused on senior high school because of that preparedness for society. And then we don't tell them master your physics, chemistry, biology, geography, all your subjects. We say there is a world. It's called the land of Kirion. And this world has been riven by strife over the past 50 years. You learners, what we're trying to tell them is you're the ones that can turn Nigeria around. But first of all, we're telling them to turn around the land of Kirion. They can bring unity and peace to this land by their personal mastery. So there are 13, I've not mentioned learning, I've not mentioned education. The learners are all glued, they're listening to us. You have 13 kingdoms. You start off as a citizen, you have to get promoted and become a knight, then you become a consul, then you become a master. If you master 13 kingdoms by August 31st, you become a grandmaster. And by becoming a grandmaster, you stand to win lots of prizes. We're taking the top 10 grandmasters to Oxford, Cambridge, Ivy League schools, and phones and prizes. So they now start trying to learn. So they now say, okay, how do I win this thing? I said, go and become a grandmaster. When you try to become a grandmaster, you come face to face with Socratic learning. So we have about 60,000 Socratic questions, which take learning objectives and break them into cumulative pieces over a tree, so that by questioning you and asking you bite size, because we were thinking of the African who has a phone with low data, so that you're not going to use more than 10 megabytes of your data every day. You are going to go topic by topic. You're going to be winning diamonds. You're going to be winning stars. You can battle with your friends. You can go to the battle zone, the training zone. You go from Nu, you go from Epsilon. You start conquering all these kingdoms and sharing and meeting. And then only in hindsight do you realize you now know about Inselbergs. Only in hindsight you realize that you now know about cells. Because we're trying to catch the engagement layer. There's a slower layer. In the office, we call that L1, where we achieve the academic driven by the engagement. So what Kinemo is trying to do is to make you feel that if the key to your future is learning, why is learning boring? Why is learning a sad thing? Why when I say come and learn, you start to cry? Rather, we have learners who wake up in the middle of the night and buzzing, please, I need to challenge on who wants to battle on physics, who wants to battle on maths. And then what they do is they go look for where there's coverage. They go look for money. In fact, they give us all sorts of ideas about, all sorts of ideas about how to achieve their goals. So when you focus on the learner, we all say learning is good. Let me quickly tell you very short, well, let me not take up time, but if you talk to learners, they will say that my teacher said, if I do well, I'll become a graduate. But my teacher enters the same bus with us. I'm not sure that this graduate thing is so nice. Agbero always has money. My teacher doesn't have money. So they don't get attracted. But when you say, if you learn, you change the world. If you learn, you'll be great. Then they get interested. So we focus on the learner side. And as a personal mastery tool after school, you can go through your curriculum, finish your curriculum before the rest of your class. And with this mastery learning method was invented by a professor called Benjamin Bloom, you can show that they actually have deeper learning outcomes. They remember what they learn longer, and they pull them from storage in their memories effortlessly. So you make learning not resemble learning, but you're achieving deep learning goals. So that's what we try to do. It's been a long journey, tricky getting engagement, but right now it's looking very exciting.
Great, thank you very much, Tunji. So again, you're also focusing on complementing the learning experience that they get in schools, but doing it through gamification and this quest and this challenge, which again is also what we all want to do in terms of conquer the world. So I'm going to open up and start taking some questions, but now unfortunately we seem to have lost the Honorable Minister. He has some connectivity challenges, but I'll start with a question on, and I'm going to ask you this one because you spoke about continuous learning. And so the question is from Adun Okukwe, and she's saying, I would like to hear the panelists touch on vocational education. What are the opportunities for technical and vocational education and training in Nigeria? TVET is important for sustainable development and improving quality of employment. Can we rethink TVET as well?
Let me unmute this. Okay, so I think this is one facet in which digital technologies are especially important. So if you look at where the world is going, history is like replete with this this sort of thing where we see a trend happening and we choose to dismiss it. Now, people are engaging in continuous learning all the time, every day. I bet you everybody, even the panelists, as experienced and knowledgeable as all you great people are, you're constantly watching YouTube videos and learning and buying books on Amazon and reading. This is the nature of the world today. But you're having to do that in the context of your work life. You're teaching at Lagos Business School. You are running BusinessDay. You're an editor. You're an entrepreneur, but you're continuously learning. So how do you make this happen in the context of people working, not being able to commute, not being able to take time off of work? So I think this is where the world is going. I think, and first of all, let's even start with the fact that industries are changing so much. So the skills needed to be a successful entrepreneur, even for me today, are very different from the skills needed to be a successful entrepreneur 20 years ago. And this is where digital technology comes in, I think. It's the ability to learn bit by bit, month by month, in snippets and chunks, as opposed to this industrial era sort of certification that we came from before. All of us, I think, this resonates with all of us. I'm pretty sure, the nature of Frank's business, for instance, has changed fundamentally from just 20 years ago. The economics of it, the operations of print, the content gathering and the publishing and the editing and the tools. So how does a leader like him stay on top of all of these things? I believe that we're entering a world where these sorts of certificates that we hang on a plaque in our studies, as nice as those are, I think those will become less and less relevant. And you're going to need this sort of continuous vocational learning and instruction. Unfortunately, I must say, if I'm to be honest, that I'm not sure we're prepared for that right now. Not many countries are, to be fair to Nigeria or Africa. Nobody really is. We're just getting used to this idea. But I think you're going to see more and more players get into this notion of like professional reskilling and upskilling and continuous skilling. And I do think that digital technologies may be punctuated with, let's gather at Lagos Business School, or come in for some practicals, or come in and learn how to do that surgery that you've been learning about. That punctuation will be there. But I do think that digital technologies, or TMT more broadly, technology, media, and telecoms will play a huge, huge role in this. This is the way the world is going. The idea of here is a diploma, you studied electrical engineering, and that's it, and you never have to walk into a school again for the rest of your life. I think that notion is gone. And that's probably even going to be accelerated by the pressures we're seeing right now. There's also, if I may just add one final point, the pressure coming from, we're entering a period of time, I think, and some people are saying this could last as long as 1 to 2 years. Again, going back to the Great Depression, the world didn't normalize for over 10 years. So people are going to be under financial pressure. At the same time, diplomas from the best schools in the world are getting so expensive. They're just not affordable anymore. And this is even coming down to secondary and primary school. So you're going to need a new sort of mode for individuals to learn where they can pay on a continuous pay-as-you-go basis. And again, this resonates with that notion of continuous education.
Thanks, Sim. So what I hear you saying is one of the tenets of the digital economy, where we begin to unbundle our content. And we saw this in the days of the CD. Rather than buying an entire CD, you could buy your song and you could have access to your music rather than having it in a structured package. So Adam, I hope that answers your question. So we need to be more focused on skills. I want to learn this point, I get and learn it, and I move on. Bridget, there was a question that I wanted to bring to your attention, because you mentioned the issue about youth and youth unrest. So Kemi Adebayo says, what advice will be given to a private school providing high quality education in a very poor area and low income area on how to embrace digital technology, where most of the parents don't even have money for data? School fees are between 10K for primary and 18K for secondary per term.
Okay, so no silver bullets here. I think that one thing I find about education is people who go into education usually tend to be very passionate, because it's not the best way to become a billionaire, and and it has a lot of stress and a lot of real life problems like this. I have a level of educational quality I want to deliver, and it has a cost. So I think that if the question is the quality of education, and I'm not a believer in watering down educational quality to economic level of people. Rather, it's about looking for economic solutions to deliver that quality, because teachers do need to be paid, and the equipment and infrastructure still does need to be invested in. So there are two questions I would ask myself, and I've done work with lots of schools. The first question is, what is her model, right? So let's say, before I even think of digital, I just say, okay, this is the cost of running my school. This is the community I'm trying to serve. Are you okay on day one? So is she currently coping at sort of like the equilibrium state, or this is that we're struggling financially to start with? Then in that case, it's not digital that is introducing the cost pressure, is the model, is the society. And so education usually for the less privileged requires support because the providers need to be paid. And so it's a question of looking for what support options are out there. But if it's and really with that, I'm not sure I'm best placed to help, although maybe if she sends me an email, I can give her some ideas. But if it's that, okay, my model works as it is today, and then now I'm trying to see how do I leverage technology more, I always tell people who are non-technical that domain experts are the drivers of technology. So when someone comes and starts telling you a technology and you don't understand what the person is saying and it's sounding expensive and it's sounding, just leave that person. If you can afford an internet connection, you will find not just cheap, you will find free options of those things. So it's about becoming aware of what you can do. A lot of parents have been telling us the past 2 weeks, and I like to even distinguish between virtual learning and digital learning. Many parents have been telling us, we created a product called Gidimo Homeschool to help them, and many of them have been saying that I don't like this technology thing. I'm burning money on data with all this money. These even the ones who can afford the infrastructure. My school said I should pay school fees, I should do this, it's very expensive. Then I have to sit down with the children all day. I can't even rest. I'm now the new teacher, and then the not so many people can use. So there are lots of issues around it, but you don't have to be there. If somebody can think about, can expose you to solutions. So my short answer is that if you feel the problem with technology, say your options. Better options with some high cost. You know that if I don't have money, I have no option. If you have an internet connection, you find a solution. And if you can get a bit educated or find something helpful, but yeah, these are challenges that are real in Nigeria.
Okay, thanks, Tunji. Got a bit muffled up there. And at this point in time, we're going to launch a second poll. And this poll is important because it now brings in the role of the telco operators and the telco ecosystem in the delivery of education in general. But while we do that, I would also have us continue the conversation. So I'm going to come to you because, again, we've talked a lot and Sim has reminded us that no matter what happens, the sense of normal is different, right? So, and I think I want us to sort of look at some of those things regarding what we see as normal. And I think one of the things that has also struck a lot of the audience is how do we make education affordable and inclusive? So Falawe, let's start with you there. How do we basically liberalize education as a tool, as a human right for every single Nigerian child?
Thank you. And I've been listening in on, all the contributions. And I must say, literally, like in my chair, I was just itching to share. And I'm itching to share because I think, again, about the demographic which we work in at Teach for Nigeria. I think, and this forms majority of the children in this country. And so the truth of the matter is that majority of these children do not have access to this internet, to these devices, whether it's laptops, whether it's mobile phone. And when also you think about the need for them to foster independent learning, individualized learning, and then you think about the role of their teachers and their parents in all of this mix, the ecosystem just cannot allow for that to happen. Like this cannot thrive. Like I'm picturing a school, in a typical school in one of the communities that we work in. You have overcrowded classrooms, about 135 children in one classroom crammed. And more than 50% of these children will not have notebooks. They don't have textbooks. If they manage to have notebooks, they don't even have the textbooks to learn. And majority of these children are like 3 years back, in grade level. So they're not even able to, you probably will be teaching primary 4 or 5, and then they're not literate. They can't read or write, whether it's a paragraph. So when you think about this context that we're dealing with, the truth is, yes, digital learning and computers and technology and internet could definitely, contribute to helping to solve this challenge. But in the real sense of it, with this reality, we need to do so much more. Like, I think about some of the examples that I see some of our teachers leverage. Some of them are looking at ways to engage their learners through radio. And so it's like, how do we, run core subjects? How do we run some core areas and lessons via radio? Because that is what is accessible to a lot of these communities. And even in that, they're finding communities that do not even have access to radio. And so some of them are thinking, and which is where I think the role of teachers, the role of schools, it's like that data to say which communities, which families have radios, which families have TV. How can we support the parents to ensure that their children are able to access this? When I think about the low-hanging fruit for us in ensuring that our children continue to learn remotely, I think those are some of the things that we need to think about. And then start thinking about who is going to be in charge of the instructional design of putting together a radio school or putting together a television school. Like, what are the things that we need to do at community level, whereby, communities can take ownership, where maybe some elders or churches in that community can decide, what, a paging system could be used to broadcast or amplify what is being taught on TV or what is being taught on radio. There is a community in Tanzania where a colleague was sharing, this community, they don't even have access, there's no power. They don't even have access to TV or radio. But you know what we're doing? The school head then decided that we would go and embark data collection. Who has what? And so they put together work packs. And they're putting these work packs together, sending it to parents, grandparents who are looking after the children. And they're saying to them, this is the work for the week. And so they have like poems in there, they have stories, and they're guiding the parents via telephone and saying to parents, because now the role of teachers is beyond just delivering content, because content is now available everywhere, but it's to facilitate relationship. How does my students like to learn? What is at home for, is this child's family able to provide meals for them? So my child is probably like, so it's more relationship building than content delivery. And back to the story of the Tanzania case. So you have teachers now who are reaching out to parents and saying, these are the questions that you're going to ask this child to assess that they've actually read the story in their pack. These are some of the questions, and that is what we're seeing happening. So if we really want to get to the 68,000 schools and reach the millions of children, who do not have access to computers right now, internet, which is the case of majority, we really need to start rethinking how to build, our content and curriculum into radio, into television, maybe WhatsApp teaching, for example. I'm seeing examples of that as well, where some of the teachers in our schools are saying, well, there's some parents who actually have Android phones. And so how can we, share content with them? How can we share lessons with them where they can facilitate that? Because my fear and my worry is that if we continue to focus on, just driving this digital, like technology and computer and internet narrative, we're going to continue perpetuating this divide and this social inequity that we're trying to address. So it's really, how do we focus on that low-hanging fruit, which is where radio comes in, which is where TV comes in, and also with mobile phones.
Thank you so much, Falawi. And I think that one thing we need to also look at with this, from what you're saying, is this issue about community-based engagement. And this also goes back to another sector that's quite dear to my heart, which is agriculture. Because when you think about how do we reach farmers in terms of new farming methods, and this is where you have a whole system of extension workers. So how do we sort of build and learn and reuse some of these components rather than trying to rebuild them? Another thing I'm hearing you saying is that let's not focus only on digital channels. There are different types of channels. For example, there's television, there's radio, there's even the idea of dropping leaflets or even having workbooks that the communities can use and share in that kind of way. And again, from a technology perspective, it's really about this Uberization of our world. What do I have and how can we share, and what do you need? And let's build a sharing economy around the ecosystems and the communities to ensure that we can grow and scale. So on that note, I'm going to now come to you, Yonyi, because again, we're talking about affordability. And one of the things is that I think that there's many divides that we have to cross. So my own image is, I have a family of 4. How do I afford digital learning, even in a family of 4?
Thank you. Just to add a little bit to what Folawe said, I think it's very important. And we also need to realize that in taking education to communities, we need to identify what the needs of the communities are. I know that our parents today, with the wave of digital learning, online learning, and the role that they are asked to play at home now, is the fact that they're now being thrust into the role of teachers, which they are not ready for. But this doesn't exist. This kind of excuses don't exist in the community. I mean, in the community, we still have communal living, and I think it's important to let them see the benefits of it and how education can translate to a better life for them and earning and income. And so in a community, for example, that is predominantly an agricultural based community, it's good to see how education will improve that for them, and similar things in other settings. So it's something that should be contextualized and should be made to fit into the different needs of the various communities. Having said that, coming back to the issue of I'm a family of 4 and we have only one device. This is, I guess maybe you were a fly on the wall and some of the conversations we've been having since we started our online engagement with our students and everything. But it's very clear, I mean, having one device as a starting point, I think is more than enough for a family. And as I asked a lot of families, you have telephones, you have iPads, you have at least a laptop between the parents in the home. So that's more than enough for the children to access learning. And the way that it depends again on how the content is packaged. I mean, if it's a recorded lesson, the children could always access the lesson at any time of the day. So I think parents can use the opportunity to have a kind of learning schedule for their children. Some can be engaged in some chores in the morning, depending on the age of the children. It's an opportunity for parents to teach their children those things that they can't learn in school. It's an opportunity for bonding, and it's an opportunity for them to get to know their children better. So they can have a schedule. One can start with a synchronous real-time lesson in the morning, while recorded lessons are there for the next one and all of that. So there are different ways that this can be packaged, and it will depend, of course, on the different age levels of the children. But this is really not a problem, and it shouldn't really be a problem. But we are gradually getting to that situation where for those who can afford it, not having a device is no longer an excuse not to have access to learning, because it is there, it is available at the top or at the touch of a button. And so it's not an excuse. And it brings me to the fact and one realization that I have come to, that we need to educate our parents as well as we go along in this thing. We're all chatting on unprecedented waters, chatting, new terrains. There's a lot of pushback from parents. So I tell people, I tell my teachers, I tell people who work with me, just be patient. We are all learning. There's a learning curve for every one of us in this situation. And so we need to educate parents as well. We need to let parents know that primarily they are parents. A parent is a parent. And in those days, our parents were our first teachers. The time and the age where parents passed this responsibility on to schools and to teachers, I think is gradually coming to an end.
Great, thank you so much, Yonyi. And I think that I'm going to take on this conversation regarding affordability. And Bumi, I'm coming to you because I think that you mentioned about how do we engage private sector in sort of building a pool of funds, because no matter what we can see, government funding is never sufficient in terms of how to mobilize education. So can you please share with us, at EdFin, how are you sort of aggregating and building some of these structures and these financial instruments so we can actually grow the pool of funds available for education?
Thank you very much. I was having some internet problems earlier. First, I want to address the issue of bringing education to areas that probably have low infrastructure, low income households. And one of the things that I feel is really the role of private sector. And when I talk about private sector, for instance, part of the infrastructure that we need He's putting in broadband. He's putting in electricity. He's putting in roads, even the school structures. What incentives is government putting in place to encourage these private sector organizations to actually go to those areas? So for instance, if you notice that, say, let's say an area in Ekpe, there's schools there and they don't have infrastructure. Is government able to give tax incentives for those who now have to go and build the infrastructure there? Because most of the telcos will be looking at, oh, what's the traffic? What's the demand? How do I invest this money? Because money is scarce. So government needs to put in place incentives to encourage private sector capital to be invested in areas where they want to provide public services such as education, health, and so on. So that's really, really important. Some of the things we have done in EdFin to mobilize private capital is to highlight the importance of education. Where you have an educated populace, the larger the number of people that are educated, then the whole country benefits.
Okay, we seem to have lost Bumi. Bumi, we can't seem to hear you. Okay, so I'm going to now ask my panelists. Now let's look forward. Yes, Sim has reminded us that nobody is a fortune teller or, you know, has our insights into the future. But then I want to say what has happened has happened. We're in an unprecedented time. We're living in the world of remote teaching or remote learning. It's virtual, it's synchronous, it's asynchronous, it's mobile, it's digital, it's radio, it's television. So what are the opportunities and how do we begin to build the robustness of this ecosystem? And I want us to think about it from both the private sector as well as public sector engagement, because the minister did highlight the fact that whether we like it or not, the states are also very involved in the whole process of education policy and education delivery. So what are the future opportunities and how do we collectively build on some of the insights and some of the strategies that we've shared today? So I can start with Folawe, if you don't mind.
Could you repeat the last bit of the question again? I didn't hear.
My question was really, how do we take this forward? What are the opportunities going forward? How do we build on some of the conversations and some of the ideas that we've shared here today? How do we engage more private sector players, engage at the state, at the subnational level?
I think so I'm just going to share this, and I was saying this recently to someone. I see some sort of concerted effort happening across the healthcare system. Like, we know that we're facing an epidemic, and when you see the institutions and the way that they're working alongside countries' Ministry of Health and like health physicians and doctors, you can see some sort of alignment. I think that we need to bring that sense of agency and urgency to education as well. I think that we also need to bring a mindset of collectiveness. So we need to approach this collectively. This is not only going to be, there's no silver bullet solution to this. There is no overnight solution to this. It's going to require a lot of work, a lot of multiple actors. And I also think, it's going to require a lot of leadership to really drive and transform this. And my own, because I've been on several conversations and I'm hearing a lot around the technology. I know that there's short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions and investment that we can focus on. But what I beg for is to leave with this question to say, what are the fundamentals that we need to put in place to ensure that our children truly continue to access learning and continue to access quality education? I think that it's important for us to allow for that question to drive whatever it is that we're doing, because if not, we would only further perpetuate the already existing inequity. And so for me, it's how do we bring together stakeholders, whether it's teachers, educators, whether it's the quality assurance directors at the different ministries, the different governors, funders, private sector, telcos, the media houses, because one of the biggest challenge is people have to pay for airtime to put out, content for children to continue learning. Is this the time for us to, also have a dedicated radio or television station that is going to be brought, put across the different countries? So I think, coming together to really define that. And I think one last thing also that needs to happen is, what do we really want? We've been talking about this future of education for the longest time. I think that future of education is what we're dealing with now. It's a future where we're uncertain. It's a future that is volatile. It's one that needs resilience and all of. It's also important that when we're thinking about this education, we need to think about what we need and what we want for this future and for our children. So again, it's collective action, it's collaborating and working together. It's leadership that would drive and push this and that would champion this movement for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Falawe. Yonyi, your own thoughts in terms of the future and opportunities.
Yes, thank you very much. And I apologize that after this I have to leave. I'll just round this up with where we now. What COVID-19 has thrown us into is uncertainty, volatility, change. It's clear now because we've all shifted and moved from our comfort zones, and we are doing the things that we've all heard before and never dared to do, or thoughts that we would make the time to do but never got round to. So we are looking at, everybody now is a risk taker because we are all treading in an uncertain environment. We don't know what the next day will bring. And so even in planning now, planning is short-lived. You plan now for today, you don't know what tomorrow will bring. And so that's where we are. And it has thrown up more than ever before the huge gap and inequity in our educational system. And I want us to take a cue from Ebola. When the Ebola outbreak in 2014 happened, we all rallied round and there were a lot of short-term interventions which could have translated into long-term. But after Ebola, everybody just went back to doing things, the usual way, and we forgot all about that. So it's very important that the government at this point know that we need to have a policy that will prepare us for this kind of disruption. It can come and it comes without any kind of warning. And so we need to be prepared for that. And we need to engage everybody. I think the government needs to leverage on all the telcos and private individuals out there. They need to engage with private schools. Private schools have a lot that they can offer and support, the government with. They need to have these conversations with the private schools. I'll just round off with something I saw today on an Instagram page of Shola Adeshaki, and she just gave an acronym for COVID. And that sums up, pretty much everything that we've been talking about. It talks about C for collaboration, O for opportunities, V for versatility, I for intentionality. We have to be intentional about the things that we do from here on. And then, of course, diversification. It's not a one-cap-fits-all anymore. So we need to be ready for that. And then we just need to, someone said, think outside the box, think within the box, think under the box. In fact, throw away the box and just think and do what works. That's where we are at now, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Bumi, your thoughts, opportunities on the future.
Yeah, so thank you very much. One key opportunity that I want to talk about is how government actually spends on education. So currently, everyone talks about the allocation to education from as a percentage of the budget is too low. But even in that low amount, how are we actually spending money? So for instance, UBEC funding, you need counterparts funding from state governments. Now, with COVID, where state governments are struggling with reduced income, covering the overheads, they are not going to be able to do that investment in schools. So government needs to change the structure in allocation. I was reading about the allocation, even of the education spend, almost 74% goes to recurrent expenditure, less than 10% to capital. The structure of education, you have so many ministries, SUBEC, all these structures. Who is controlling what? How do we create policies that ensure that investment, even though it is low, actually goes to the right places? Then I was talking about incentives to private sector so that they can actually invest in electricity, even in those areas where people, because even if you want to listen to a radio, you want to use your device, you need electricity. So those kind of things, where are we putting our investment, making sure that we're investing in the most efficient manner is truly important. And there's no way we can do away with collaboration, both from schools, parents, teachers, service providers, private, public, for education, for us to get the human capital that we really, truly need. We need to improve the way we invest and make sure we're investing in the most impactful manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bumi. So Sim, I'll come to you.
So thanks so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I have to say that maybe it's by my nature, but I'm actually very optimistic about where we are as a country. There have been a lot of mistakes made in the education sector, especially as it pertains to public sector investment. I think we've seen the private sector really lead the way. But I think out of this crisis, can be forced to do some very innovative things. Now, while the money hasn't actually been spent well, the truth is that if you look at Nigeria's spending on education, public spending on education as a percent of, in the context of GDP or even just government spending, it actually has been okay. But the truth is that we simply don't have the money to do what we have to do. The kind of population that is coming up, we have one of the youngest populations in the world, and with the skill sets that we need to develop as we go on. Now, when I listen to Yuri from Corona talk about the future, and everybody here talk about the future, and willingness to embrace new models, I have to be really optimistic, because I don't think you see this in many countries. We have to, as a people, now try entirely new ways of educating our young people. I understand that there may be some apprehension, as Folawe has articulated, in terms of device cost or internet connectivity. And that seems to be creating some kind of digital divide. But if you permit me to disagree, I think that, consider right now we are holding a conference on Zoom via video, and this sort of bandwidth wouldn't have been available to us even just 5 years ago. So things are not where they should be, but they are getting better. In terms of the devices, the average cost of a smartphone on Konga or Jumia, I read this, there was a survey done. The average cost of a smartphone for the Nigerian consumer in 2015, I believe, was about $100 US. Today, the average cost of a smartphone is $50. So the technology is becoming cheaper and more available. So I'm quite optimistic. I think what we need to do now is show a willingness to experiment with all kinds of new innovative models for distributing education. And yes, that includes digital, and it includes television, and it includes radio. There are a multitude of new ways that Nigeria must experiment with to educate not just its young people, but its workforce, and continually skill those people. And I think, the thing about being Nigeria, maybe I'm just sort of a perpetual optimist. The thing I think that is good about the crisis we're going through is we have no choice. There is no other way. We have to embrace these new ways of doing things. And I think that we will. You've seen that this crisis has already caused us to make big moves in liberalizing the petroleum sector. We've made big moves now, it seems, in the implementation of the Orosan civil service reform report. This crisis creates an opportunity for us to do very bold things. And I think it's
Okay, we seem to have lost Sim. Tunji, do you want to chime in now?
I've been trying to prevent myself from chiming in for the past 15 minutes.
Kept you for last.
Time we do very bold.
Okay, Sim, do I go ahead?
Sim, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I think I lost you for a second.
Yes, you did. So just go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I said that crisis forced us to do very bold things. And I think the silver lining in all of this, the fiscal pressure we are about to experience as a people, we've never seen negative oil prices. It's never happened. and oil is starting to recover, but everybody agrees that we're not going to be returning to $60 oil, certainly not $100 oil anytime soon. So we're going to face some serious challenges, and these are going to force us to do some very bold things in education, especially, but in all kinds of sectors. And for me, that makes me optimistic.
Great, thank you, Sim. So Tunji, you can unleash.
Yes. So I'll just say three things, right? The first one I want to say is, and I really wish and hope we all go home with this, it is not either or. It is not either or. It is not either or. It is how do we prepare our children? How do we prepare 100 million people below the age of 18, 100 million people for 2025, not 1985. We have not done a good job of preparing them for 1985. 1985 is gone, AI is coming. So it is about lives. It is not either or. I grew up in Lagos. I used to live in Ilupeju. And whenever there was a fire, sometimes you would have a fire, everybody would rush out in the middle of the night, daddy and mommy with big bucket, little children with little cup, some with little spoon. Everybody will be throwing some water here and there. Then the fire service will come, and they'll come with their fire engine. And then when they arrive, they'll now say there's no water in the fire engine. Then they will have to go and start looking for water for the fire engine. We'll also be throwing our little cup and our little, and as we're throwing our little cup and little bucket, we're saving the lives of those who are stuck inside that building. And then eventually, somehow or the other, we manage at some point to fill the fire engine with water from God knows where, and then it switches on its big pipe, and then finally puts off the fire. Were all those other efforts unnecessary? You see, so the point is, it's not either or. It's a huge problem, and everything that can contribute to this problem needs to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, our house is on fire. We have 22 million between 15 and 19 on the way to join the age of 20, where we already have 48 million without work waiting for them, and 22 million that are born already. In 4 years, they're joining. So I don't think really we should look at it as, is it this way? Is this every way that can work? Please bring it in, because our house is on fire. And I'll tell you all that I am not in education because of technology. I'm in technology because of education, because I will actually disagree with everybody. I'm one of the few Nigerians, maybe the only three of us, who don't agree that power is our biggest problem. I actually believe education is our biggest problem. I know nobody else in Nigeria agrees with me, but preparing the human beings, because it's the human beings who can fix power and fix roads. And so I challenge anybody to find a cheaper method. I challenge anybody to find a method that doesn't need electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't need electricity, it needs a battery. They are two very different things. So it's not a question of what, it's a question of what can we do. In 2012, gross capital formation in the educational sector was 6.5 trillion naira. And 85% of that went into constructing buildings, new ones, not the old ones that needed refurbishment. Supposing you are taking that 6.5 trillion naira and giving money to every parent, I say, all of you, I share 30,000 naira to you, that would have changed many lives. So I feel that we shouldn't look at it as saying, oh, this way or that way. Is what can you do? What can you join? And then maybe eventually, I do agree with Folawe on the need for a consensus. I'm happy about this conversation because the house is on fire. And when we all realize the house is on fire, maybe we will get the fire engine and start going. But in the meantime, we can't wait for the fire engine. Everybody has to see what they can do. And I'll tell you two short stories. There's a boy called Saidu in Jigawa, in a village outside Dutch State. He's now, in fact, I could tell you 101 stories. Let me tell you one about our gate man next to our office. He's in Borno State University now. He borrowed a phone from his friend. 3 of them used to use this phone. And with this cost of 500 naira, they were able, while one was our gate man, the other was his assistant. When this one went to university, the other one just did his matriculation. And he's doing 500 naira. You can't do education with 500 naira because you can't pay the teacher. But that mobile approach allows me to do it for 500 naira. Right now, all MTN subscribers are using Gidimo free. If I make school education free, who will pay the teacher? How will the teacher eat? So I think that it's not just about tech or not tech. It's about how you use the tech, not just about tech, but how you use the tech. This boy in Dutse, he learned government because he wanted to win airtime. And he said to us, I didn't know I could learn. I thought it was only the children in the GRA who can learn. So Folawe has pointed out the economic problem. There's also the social-psychological problem of the poor, who we have told that they are failures from day one. So I totally feel all those issues. But the question is, what are we going to do about those issues? Can this help? Not either or. And the final one I'll say is, not every method has equal educational effectiveness. So while we use method A or method B, we have to know that this method is good on cost, is not so good on effectiveness. This method is good on personal and is not so good on social. So we have to look at each method. Okay, yes, I'm using this one, it's helping me on cost, but right now it's not so effective, but everybody will get a basic as opposed to 0. Or I'm using this very high impact method, only 10 people can get it. It's not either or. I think we need to do both. I think we need to do all. We need to be as passionate as the people on this panel, but everybody who can do something about education, because our house is on fire. This is not being like just sounding alarm and crisis, because I am actually optimistic. We have seen a lot of changes. The final thing I'll say about this issue of look at educational efficacy is, ladies and gentlemen, in academia, many people think of education as just improving the person. The Nigerian needs to eat and feed a family. We need to think about learning for livelihoods. Youth unemployment, 60, 65%, 20 something million. So if I just process you through a method, it could be radio, it could be TV, it could be a classroom, and you didn't learn anything, then Mr. and Mrs. Employer will not employ you. Entire banking sector, 230,000 staff. Entire telecom sector, 40,000 staff. Every year, the universities churn out 350,000. So if we do not use education to teach people to do things that can feed them, we're in trouble. The house is on fire. Everybody is trying. Let's all keep trying. Let's all keep doing something. Every effort is welcome. We do need a concerted effort. We do need everybody in the nation to know there is a major crisis. But every effort is welcome.
Thank you so much, Tunji. We have the Honorable Minister back, and I think that I would have him sort of share his own last comments. And I think, Honorable Minister, I hope you heard Tunji's call to action in that sense, where the house is on fire. How are we going to address this? It's not a single person who's going to solve the fire and quench the fire, but all hands need to be on deck. From the perspective of the federal government, how are you going to lead this initiative to quench the fire? Honorable Minister, were you able to get that?
Yes, this thing's been coming off and on for like an hour. I can't just seem to get it. What was the last thing you said?
Well, so basically, we're trying to round up, and we just noticed that you came back. And the whole idea is that Tunji has sort of given us a call to action that the education sector, the house is on fire. And we need to all hands on deck to sort of quench the fire in any little way possible. And another thing Folawe said earlier on is that we need that leadership. So I'm asking from the federal perspective, how are you going to drive each and every one of the stakeholders in the ecosystem to quench the fire?
And if I may add, relocation of the budget, to ensure that funding goes to the right places, like Quebec and so on. What are the national policies that will be changed to ensure that the right spots are actually funded for education?
Well, that is a terrific question, but I would hate to disappoint you, because I'm sure you are aware that the national budget is out of the window right now, because Nigeria will probably be running at some sort of deficit, some serious deficit, because even loans that have been taken since the past 20 years that need to be serviced, Nigeria does not have even minimal revenue to be able to service them. But we'll get to that. What we need to do, and that I'm really appreciative of all the effort all of you are making. This is not, I'm just a minister for a couple of months or years to come, and somebody else probably be doing this job sometime. But the work at every time is to coordinate all these efforts. And the bits I've heard from everybody is, like Tunji said, the house is on fire. Everybody needs to
bring in whatever it is that they can do. And we're willing to coordinate that. That's what our work is at service, really. It's not anybody's, we've agreed to be here, and therefore we must make ourselves available to you or to every other player in whatever form they can. And then we can give that pedestal for everybody to stand and relate to what has happened, every other person is doing, so we can coordinate it. We can't actually take the governors by the neck and direct them in one direction or the other, but we are really urging them on, trying to show them what is possible. The nuances of their local economies also help them do the things they do. But like I said, we have a national direction. I'm pleased with how the president has addressed it. He thinks that it is our responsibility to show everybody else the way. Well, Lagos State as a government, for instance, is running at a different speed. And then a state like Borno State is running at a different speed. Then you have different speeds everywhere. So each time at WAEC or at National Common Entrance Examinations, you get a preponderance of pupils and students from just one part of the country. And it seems, and then by the time you get to JAMB, you have 2.4 million children, and it then seems that, oh, all of them are only from one part of the country. That actually shouldn't be the case. Everybody should be pulling their straps on, and that's what I'm trying to ensure. And everybody who is making an effort in this regard, I will wish to coordinate it. I'm sure when I get the printout of this, because Zoom does store the minutes of every meeting, so any part of it that I've missed, I can then get a buy-in from there and have my technical people and all of us who are working at the ministry in all the departments look at the ones that we can synthesize and begin to cascade what needs to be done from there.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, and thank you very much, great panelists. We've had a very exciting conversation, and I think, Honorable Minister, the last challenge we have is, since the House is on fire, how do we use the education sector as a use case for driving everything we need to do in terms of the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure? Because we know that, and as we spoke earlier on, we're sort of building the train track as we're driving. So we just have to continually build and continually move ahead, but we can't wait any longer. And one thing that also the panelists have brought out in this conversation is the fact that crisis mode, maybe whether we like it or not, seems to work well for us in Nigeria, because all of a sudden, what we've been trying to do for 20 years, we've sort of been able to do in 5 years. But then, like the Ebola crisis, like all crises that we have, how do we sustain the momentum when the crisis is over? We're going to need, it's going to be beyond having the conversations, but it's now about how do we begin to explore different solutions and different situations? How do we disrupt ourselves? Because again, yes, today we have the likes of Gidimo, we have U-Lesson, but we don't know what we're going to have tomorrow. So how do we continually think about disrupting ourselves and disrupting what we're doing? How do we become a bit more agile in terms of ensuring that we can test and learn? And as my colleagues tell me, you have to fail fast and fail forward. But again, failure is part of the process, but do nothing is not an option. How do we build sustainable models? Because this is also about ensuring that there's inclusivity for all. We've talked about the gender issues, we've talked about the regional issues, but then again, and we have to ensure that how do we go and knock on some of these doors? And again, knock a bit more ferociously. So Tunji has told us about how he's able to get to Borno. Corona might not be able to get to Borno, but how do we collaborate to ensure that there's engagement in distribution and democratizing curriculum and content in a manner that's affordable and accessible to all? And I think the most important part is that, yes, while we're talking about the economic impacts, I think the socio-psychological impacts are bigger and they're harder to fix. So how do we ensure that we don't stigmatize people without the education? How do we ensure that when we go out with our Nigerian degrees or with our Nigerian certificates, we can continue to hold them up proudly? So ladies and gentlemen, you've been a wonderful audience. And I think, Frank, you'd give us some closing remarks in terms of how we're going to take the conversation forward and really drive the call to action, like the minister has said. He's there to provide the leadership. We'll work across the different levels on the different nations, nationals, and again, the MDAs, because there's a lot of telcos involved. There's a lot of brick and mortar telco power and all these things involved. And I think even with power, and let's look at what we have, or rather than let's look at the glass half full, right? We have renewables. So how do we even take renewables into some of these communities without rather than trying to wait for grid solutions to get there? So ladies and gentlemen, it's out of the box, any type of thinking, but let's do what works, and let's do what works fast and now. Thank you all very much for listening.
Yinka, thank you so very much. There isn't much for me to say except I think we already know there is a national conversation that we should have, and I think it has started today. Listening to the Honorable Minister, I am touched by his deep understanding of the ecosystem and of course the political interplay as we see it in Nigeria. Is education more important than power, or is health more important than education? I think we leave that for another day. Tunji was the one who said it's neither this nor this. So I would rather approach it that way. He also said there is fire in the house already. But I think I should mention Sim's point that things are not the way that they have always been. Things are indeed changing and getting better. And I think on that optimistic note, let me thank you all very much, and especially our Honorable Minister. Thank you so much for the honor done to us to be with us this evening. Let me also thank MTN that has been so helpful in providing the technology for this national conversation. I have absolutely no doubt, given what we are seeing in other areas as well. Sim, you alluded to that, what has happened to the memo on the Oronsaye MDA report. We are hearing things around petroleum subsidy will never happen again. It seems as if in a crisis, Nigeria is beginning to turn the corner. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. And thank you to our audience as well. You take care and keep safe.